So what got you interested in that? What was it that captivated that you said, hey, this is what I want to do?
Yeah, it was really funny. In undergrad, I was actually in biology. So I had always, when I was growing up, I loved science and biology, and I wanted to be a scientist. And during undergrad, I happened to join this program. It was like a freshman learning community called Terrascope, and we focused on solving some kind of global problem. So one of my best friends actually went to Tanzania on a different, just a totally unrelated to anything project, but she happened to meet a rural school run by a nonprofit, and later together we talked about it and decided to volunteer for that school. And that the school actually said one of the core needs they had was internet access, and this was back in 2012 or so, 2011, 2012. And it was a super rural school, kind of, maybe 60 or so kilometers out from the nearest city, and they were totally off-grid solar, and they needed internet access. So we sort of, we didn't know anything about internet access. We were like a geophysicist and a biologist, and we just sort of looked around on the internet and came across this book called Wireless Networking in the Developing World. So we read this book and sort of learned about how to get wireless internet access, like out, in the rural areas, and sort of learned a bunch of how the internet works and computer science that way. But neither of us were in computer science. And so after this project, we went to Tanzania. We actually got like a grant from our school to go there and like implement a system.
I think there's this big assumption that the United States is the wealthiest country in the world. Everyone has internet and everyone has fast internet, but that's not quite what the landscape is like. So let's talk a little bit about, I'll call them underserved or overlooked communities in the United States when it comes to internet access. Can you kind of give us a little more kind of feedback on that?
Yeah, I mean, for sure, like still rural areas and especially tribal areas within the United States are like, is a totally different experience from being in the city. Like, so they are truly like more underserved. There's like a strong divide or gradient, a spectrum of connectivity. Infrastructure is expensive. It's pretty hard to, when you have especially sparse communities, like roll out fiber to all of them. It's a long distance, and sometimes the challenges are like the rights of way and all these like complex land issues. So it's just infrastructure deployment is hard to scale. I would say like, that discourse is already like pretty predominant in the US. But then there's also, even within the cities, you do have, like, people assume that because something is a city, it's probably well covered. There's like huge geographic disparities, even within the Seattle metropolitan area, because Seattle is not the most dense area. So, like, let's say even between Seattle and Tacoma, there's like a lot of disparities in terms of connectivity. Just the speeds and the prices available, and that's literally just because it's the same issue. It's just less striking or bad as between cities and rural areas, but it's the same on. It's almost like fractal.
Sure,
So
sure.
it's the same problem where you have certain areas like downtown and like North Seattle that have really great fiber to the home connectivity. And so because of the connectivity, the infrastructure is there, the prices are also low. Whereas, the further south you get into Renton and like, towards Tacoma, those areas just, the fiber coverage is very spotty. So the first thing we discovered actually when we were starting this Seattle Community Network project. Basically, I wanted to partner with local organizations like community centers, schools, libraries, like local institutions that provide community services and make them internet spots too. And so, some of these were implemented kind of as emergency measures during COVID. Like, for example, libraries often served Wi-Fi into their parking lots and things like that. But to do this kind of on, as a movement, like as a a unified project of some kind so that community centers could also connect to each other and, support each other in having these like Wi-Fi and other types of networks. And so we kept looking for community partners that had a fast internet connection that they could share with their neighborhood. And at the same time, our research group also specializes in cellular networks, so open source cellular. So that's kind of our MO, since my advisor's grad school days. We've deployed these in rural areas around the world. And so we were like, we can just deploy the same stack here. And we were able to use the CBRS, like radio frequency band.
Oh, yes.
Which is the Citizens Broadband Radio Service. And so that's the also called like 3.5 or 3.6 or band 48 LTE. And so that, because it is, it's like dynamically licensed spectrum and it's
interesting.
It's open. So the FCC, this was like kind of a new policy around.
So can you define the dynamic bit? Because I understand, there's certain spectrum that is controlled by a different organization. There's certain spectrums that's unlicensed, but I'm not familiar with that term.
Right. This is lightly licensed. So it's kind of in between. So it's like there is a national database.
Okay.
Yeah. So there's a national database of, who is using what spectrum, what devices are using that spectrum. There are providers of this database called Spectrum Access Services. And so there are just a few providers like Google, CommScope, and a few others. And they let you use their database to enter your equipment details, and they'll model the propagation for you based on like very detailed specs.
Interesting.
And then they will say, okay, like you get allocated this channel because it won't interfere with these other devices around. And it all gets, synced up together. So that's kind of how the FCC, does make sure everything is not interfering.
So, but isn't there a gentle person's agreement that you're not going to infringe on someone else's spectrum?
When you have a license, yes. When you have unlicensed spectrum, no.
Yeah.
So this lightly licensed thing allows you to have some coordination without, everyone having to make their own agreements and also like monitor the frequencies to make sure you don't have to send a cease and desist to somebody. Yeah, we use this system. Basically, this sort of opened up, the system opened up around 2018, 2019, like right before the pandemic. And so we were lucky enough to have started already this process of like, how do we register our devices and getting the equipment and learning it. And then when the pandemic hit, we were kind of ready with some proposals like, hey, we can deploy these types of networks. And so we actually got funded by the King County CARES Act grant for marginalized adults. And then the city of Seattle also funded some pilot sites using the CBRS.
So do you know in a city the size of Seattle, how many people don't have an adequate internet access?
It's interesting because I wouldn't say I know the numbers. So here, some statistics are that like they did a kind of survey, I think it was in 2017 or 18 or so, about like internet coverage within households, so like in houses. And so that was like maybe 95%. It was pretty good. But the thing is that a lot of people don't live in houses. I guess the real challenges occur within, people who are housing unstable and people who are living in like these lower income neighborhoods with less infrastructure. And then there's this issue of, well, when the study was done, I'm not sure exactly how complete that data was because, I think it was collected via internet surveys, which is of course like
let's measure what your internet access is based upon your having internet service.
Well, so there's that. I think they also did phone, which would be a little bit better. There's also these coverage maps that are produced by the carriers themselves, or like the ISPs. And so you get these situations where if they cover like, a few houses within like a zip code or a neighborhood, then they can consider that area covered. And there was a lot of places actually said, okay, like, our residents, we have like a pipe coming in, but all the residents have to buy like their individual units of internet for their house, and they can't afford it. And so we have like 2 people in the building who have internet. So you have cases like that. You have cases where you have internet service available to buy, but it's actually like 15 megabits for like 60 a month or something like that. And it's like, where did this internet plan come from? Is this from like the 90s or 2000s? Or even you can buy, I know a place in South Seattle where you can buy 1.5 megabits per second to your home for like 65 a month.
Oh my goodness. You know, part of our mission is to try to see in what ways we can help educate and help support initiatives in underserved communities. So we appreciate that you're those people on the front line doing that kind of work. And also bringing, you know, to light just kind of those inequities and, you know, kind of working to kind of make that, you know, improve that. Kind of a final question. If you were gonna, you know, share your experience with NANOG to another potential student, what would you say?
I would say definitely go. Um, it's interesting because I can see a world in which, you know, someone in academia who's planning to be an academic, because I'm a grad student, and, you know, sometimes we can be a little like cloistered or insular. And I would say it's a really valuable experience to meet people in the industry and see kind of how networks work in the real world.
Right. Well, one, I hope when you do get your kind of senior thesis put together that you hope to present it to the NANOG community. I think we'd love to hear that. And second is just thank you so much for being here. And I really appreciate and respect the work that you do in the community to you know, to help out the underserved and overlooked.
Thank you. Yeah, I really appreciate the work you do too. And
Okay.
like fostering this nano community, like that's super awesome. So thank you.
Thank you, Esther.